Hey everyone, I'm Bass Pro Dean Rojas and you're with bassresource.com. We're going to talk about frogging. Frogging is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I get lots of questions on, what color frogs do you throw, what time of year, what water temperature, clarity, sky conditions, how do you want, to know everything about frog fishing. And so I'm going to kind of give you an outline of what I like to do when I'm faced with, conditions multiple times of the year. So we're going to roll into spring. We're going to start off with spring, and spring is something that it took me a long time, years, to figure out. When is the best time to throw a frog? How early in the season you can do that. And as you know, I spent like 3 years on tour. That's all I did was throw a frog, because I wanted to find the limitations of what the bait was all about and learn everything I could that would allow me to use it and be more efficient with it. And that turned a lot of it to where I was throwing it in the springtime. And I never really thought about it, until I would just, for the heck of it, I would just throw it, when the water temperature was in the 50s. Because a lot of times, if you live on a river system or a lake that has a lot of shallow water, those fish live in 1 or 2 feet of water. And so what's the difference between them moving up the water column a foot or going down in the water column, to grab a bait? It's easier for them to go to the surface as well. So that was my thought process with that. If they're going to bite it, it's only shallow, they're up there, they'll come up to the surface and get it, so let's give it a try. Well, lo and behold, that's when everything opened up my eyes to the whole thing about frog fishing in cold water. You usually think it's a summertime deal, and so for me it was a big learning curve on figuring out, what and where and how to work the bait and those same things. And what I've noticed in the springtime, especially in the early spring, it depends on where the country, but it's so based on water temperature, that there's this brief window. You can probably catch them in the mornings and stuff, maybe first thing, but there's always a window in the springtime from about 1 o'clock to like 3 o'clock. There's like a 2-hour window there where the sun, if the sun's out, or that is the temperature has risen a degree or two, in certain areas to where those fish are getting active, that time of the day, because in the wintertime, they only feed, just brief moments. And so, because the water's so cold. But I learned in the springtime, there's a brief window there from like, it's like 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, in that range, depending on, what the water temperature is. But the key to that is finding banks that have, like a little bay and maybe something where a little channel swing, swings up close to the shoreline, to where the fish can move from, like, say, 1 feet of water to 3 or 4 feet of water very easily, but also have a lot of shallow water around there. And at that point, it becomes very specific on what you're looking for when you're fishing that type of cover that time of year. They're always on channel swings, they're always on little drop-offs when in the early spring like that. That way they can move up and down, and so very, very quickly. So that was always my thing. And so the bait selection, I mean, you could throw, a poppin' frog, or a regular 65 bronzeye or original. Either one of them will work in that aspect. But the key to working the frog at that time of year is slow. And you want to be able to make the presentation up onto the bank. And for me, color-wise is a big thing too. So this is our new color. It's called Sloppy Joe. It's more of a brown with some black in it and some red, like you would have, tomato sauce on a Sloppy Joe. But it's that type of color where it's a drab, dark color, not a whole lot of vibrancy to it, but something that, that time of year, creatures that are in the wild, there's not a whole lot of foliage in the background, so the colors are going to be not as bright as they would be different parts of the year. So blacks are always good. Brash greens, bronze, browns, something that's dull in color works very, very well that time of year. So basically it's just a matter of casting the frog up in those areas and working it slow. and you know, pausing it and twitching it and moving it around, and that's where it's going to, the fish, if they're there, they're going to bite it. Okay, now it's not something you can go out and win a tournament with, but if it's something that you're just a frogging freak like I am and a geek about it, and always trying to, you know, to get them to bite it, and that's half the fun of it, is to tricking them into biting a frog, you know, when the water temperature's, you know, 52 degrees or 53 degrees or 55. So then you ask, well, what's the coldest I've ever caught one in? The coldest I ever caught was in 44-degree water temperature. And so I know what they'll bite, you know, at certain times. Again, the fish are shallow. You know, it's not much for them to come to the surface and grab a bait. It is to go down and get it, you know, because they're already there anyway. So, and I've caught a range of them in the 50-degree weather, or I'm sorry, water temperature. But like, it really gets going. Like, when you're in the springtime and it's around, you know, 56, 57 in the afternoons, man, you could really put a hurting on them. Again, short little window that it's going to be optimum from like 12 to 3 in that range. It could be hit or miss on any of that, but anything after 12 o'clock to about 3 o'clock, that sun starts heading back behind the trees, that's the time you're going to catch them for the springtime. So the gear that I use a Spro made a frog rod for me, and it's something we're going to be coming out later on with it. But it's a 7-foot medium heavy action, and I pair it up with FX2 Sunline braid. I use 80-pound test line braid, but it's actually like 65, the diameter is 65 pound. So I have, you know, the distance and the accuracy that I have, and the soft suppleness of the FX2 once it gets wet. It's just a joy to work with. It makes me more efficient, and it's strong. It doesn't break, and it doesn't do anything. It does its job, and it allows me to get good hook sets in them. I recommend a high-speed reel on all my frog, and 7-to-1 gear ratio is what you need. If you want to go to 8-to-1, that's good too as well. Whatever you feel like, you know, is going to help you in that position. But a lot of that is you know, just throwing the frog and learning about it. And it's a fun bait to learn on it because everything is visual. You can give the bait life and watch what you're doing to the bait on the surface. And it's such a great feeling when you have, when you create something and give it life and you get a bite on it. You know, you see that connection. And those things are they're awesome. So in the springtime, you know, if you can get frog bites, you know, early on in the spring, you know, it's only going to get better from there on out. So hopefully these tips have helped you on that. So, you know, be close to areas where they're going to be spawning at and eventually moving up into, and don't be shy to throw the frog up there, because, you know, oftentimes they're chasing bait around as well, and they're liable to come out and eat it on the surface. So give that a try on your local river, on your lake, and see if you can get some results on that. But you'll be surprised on how many frog bites you get.